Okay, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Sadazia. I am Associate Professor in the University of Health Sciences, Department of ENT. Welcome you to the clinical posting session today for common disease of oral cavity and oropharynx. Okay, this is a long topic because basically, as you know, oral cavity is basically starts from the vermilion border of the lips to the soft palate, the arch, and the uvula. Okay, that is the posterior limit of the oral cavity itself. And if you see at the other structures, the you can see the buccal mucosa, the retromonotrigon area, the hard palate, the soft palate, the upper gingival sulcus, the lower gingival sulcus, and the tongue. The anterior two-thirds of the tongue is part of the oral cavity. The posterior one-third is part of the oropharynx. And you can see the floor of the mouth. Okay, the teeth, gums are part of the contents of the oral cavity. The oropharynx itself is basically starting from behind the anterior pillars and continuing up to the posterior pharyngeal wall. And superiorly, there's an arbitrary line which connects the this hard palate to the pharyngeal wall, and the lower limit is from the higher bone to the posterior pharyngeal wall. So these are the imaginary lines which you can imagine for the oropharynx. And once you open the mouth, we tend to, as a clinician, start seeing the tonsil itself very more frequently because it is a very common and popular part of the oropharynx which needs to be seen, and sometimes most of the times it is affected by any clinical pathology. But saying that the oral cavity comes first, and as I told you, the posterior limit is the anterior pillar and the uvula, and behind that is the oropharynx. So if we'll be first now looking at the problems which we can come across in the oral cavity, um, which is basically the most common ones are the ulcers or bleeding from the gums, bad odor, odynophagia or dysphagia, difficulty in speaking. Xerostomia means basically dryness in the mouth. That happens most commonly in post-radiation patients, or sometimes in those having some autoimmune diseases in which the production of saliva is decreased. Dribbling of saliva or increased salivation occurs. It is also called palism, and this occurs in some special children who are not used to, or they have neuromuscular incoordination of their muscles and they are not able to take in the saliva. We usually swallow our saliva as a normal habit, and we do it without being noticing it. There can be a bad taste or trismus. Trismus is basically decreased mouth opening, which we'll be talking about shortly. Okay, how does it happen, and what are the predisposing factors? Some of the common causes of oral cavity lesions include infections, immune disorders, trauma, neoplasms, skin disorders, drug allergies, vitamin deficiencies. We will not be going into detail of all of them. I'll be showing you some pictures and some disorders which are commonly seen in our OVDs. There are some differential diagnoses of viral infections, like herpes herpes simplex, virus, Epstein-Barr virus, AIDS, hand, foot, mouth disease. This is a picture of the herpes. This is caused by the Coxsackie virus. You can see small ulcers over the oral cavity, over the hard palate and soft palate, and usually common in children. Small vesicles rupture to form ulcers, yellow base with red areola. You can see a red and white base. These are quite painful and but self-limiting, and all you need is a good analgesia and hydration. This is another picture of a herpes now infection of the oral cavity. You can see the one. Sometimes, if it is less severe, you can just have an angular stomatitis, but this is a little bit advanced that the whole of the upper lip is also involved here. What you need to do is acyclovir local treatments, and if they don't resolve, you can give oral antivirals as well. Other bacterial causes include Staph aureus infections, Streptococcus, Vincent's infections, tuberculosis, granuloma, syphilis. You can also have fungal infections such as candidiasis. This is a picture of the Vincent's angina. It is also called Vincent's angina. It's a painful ulcer over the oral cavity, and you can see the bad dentation of this patient, and caused by fusiform bacteria, spirochete, borrelia, more common in the young and middle-aged people. It is important. The treatment includes a good oral hygiene, mouth ulcers with sodium bicarbonate. Penicillin and erythromycin group would also help in early recovery of these ulcers. or sometimes flagell, metronasal. Candidiasis are white gray patches on the oral mucosa and tongue, and they are common in children and sometimes they're immunocompromised patients such as diabetics or those having malignancy or those who are not able to take care of them of the oral hygiene, such as those patients who are having trismus in which they have decreased mouth opening, so they cannot brush their teeth. The treatment includes nystatin, which is an antifungal agent. Clotrimazole is also an antifungal agent. Mouthwashes help these people. This is a picture of the oral candidiasis. You can see the white patches over the whole of the oral mucosa. The difference between this and leukoplakia is the white discoloration of the oral cavity. And the difference between the oral candidiasis and this is that the oral candidiasis can be scrubbed off. If you use um, basically a tongue depressor and you scrub it off, it would easily scrub off and leave a reddened base over the mucosa. So that's how you differentiate between candidiasis and a leukoplakia. Another common problem which we come across is an aphthous ulcer. Aphthous ulcer are usually multiple, recurrent, and when they recur, they recur at a new place. In case if they are, you can see here there's a reddened white or a yellowish base with a reddened margin of the ulcer, and they are very painful. The good thing is that they are self-limiting. In 10 to 15 days they recover, but the problem is that they tend to recur. The predisposing factors include A-type personality, yani those people who are, you can call them a perfectionist. They want to keep everything on the perfection level, and they are predisposed to this. Other causes may include nutritional deficiency, autoimmune problems, but sometimes you cannot find any problem at all. And what you need to do is to give symptomatic treatment to the patient. Good painkillers, good analgesia, and good nutrition. You can give them folic acid for good early recovery, or any multivitamin to help them recover quickly. And they heal. There's a loss of connection. Continuing Beckett syndrome, you can see the oral ulcers. These are punched out ulcers, but they are also painful. You can see here there's a scene similar to the aphthous ulcer, but the differentiating point would be that the child or person has a uveitis along with the genital ulcers and over the skin. You can have traumatic ulcers such as cheek bite. You can have jagged tooth, ill-fitting dentures causing traumatic ulcers. If you are in the habit of taking hot foods or liquids or reverse smoking, that can also lead to traumatic ulcers. Sometimes even cancer can result from reverse smoking. Chemicals such as silver nitrate, phenol, and aspirin can also cause burns in the oral cavity. Management of oral ulcers basically depends on a careful history and examination to exclude any systemic problems. And after that, you need to give a good oral hygiene, counsel the patient for giving a oral hygiene, removal of local irritants, if there are any others such as the dentures, antibiotics, antiseptic solutions, and local analgesia, steroids sometimes, but not always. Definitely, good nutrition would help in the early recovery of any patient. There are some cysts which you can encounter in the oral cavity, especially because you have minor salivary gland ducts opening in the all over the oral cavity. You have some major ducts and some smaller ducts. So you can some small retention cysts in the buccal mucosa, and here you can see a ranula. Ranula is basically caused by in between going on. So continuing the ranula, this is the appearance of a belly of a frog, and this is caused by obstruction of the sublingual salivary gland ducts opening into the floor. And this is divided into an oral ranula and you can also have a plunging ranula. The plunging ranula is the one which goes into the neck. You can see the CT scan, which is basically going into the neck muscles. The treatment is basically uh, treatment of pharyngeal is basically marsupialization. In marsupialization, we open up the cyst, drain the fluid, and suture these the margins of the incision like a book. Like usually, you're used to seeing the margins to be sutured back together, but we don't suture them back together. We suture them separately. Like one flap would be here and one flap would be here, so that they don't collapse on themselves again and again form a cyst. Okay. The precancerous care conditions which we should know about is are the most important one, the leukoplakia or erythroplakia. Lichen planus can also be a precancerous condition, but very less common. That it turns into an oral cavity cancer. The other things which can be associated with cancer are the submucous fibrosis or beetle stomatitis. Here you can see the leukoplakia. Leukoplakia is basically a whitish patch which cannot be removed or scraped off. Of a 5 millimeter more or more size, and it is usually unilateral. It can be on one side area of the oral cavity, usually not corresponding on the other side. It may be associated with pan chewing, betel nut chewing, tobacco, alcohol consumption. So these all can lead to leukoplakia, and you can see this whitish patch here. Another picture of an old lady showing you the old patch, whitish patch over the lateral border of the tongue. And you can see the bad nutrition here as well. It's a very glossy tongue due to the lack of papillae over there. The leukoplakia has a predisposition to cause cancer in about 10% of the cases of in which you can you see leukoplakia. And and another problem which you can encounter is erythroplakia. Erythroplakia is more precancerous as compared to the leukoplakia, which it is basically okay. This is a betel nut which we all have seen, and maybe some of us has also taken during some occasions when which it is served at the end of the occasion. Here is a picture of the palm tumor. You can see the discoloration of the whole mucosa, the dentation, the gums. They're all stained with the katha of the palm, okay? And it stays there quite a lot. It stains everything. Okay, another condition which may lead to the cancer is submucous fibrosis. It is an insidious chronic condition affecting any part of the oral cavity and pharynx. The etiology is unknown, but in our area we know that betel nut chewing is a very common problem, and those people who don't take pan but do take betel nut or chalia in the local term, they have a predisposition to develop some mucous fibrosis. I've seen children who are come with some mucous fibrosis and very disturbing condition which the patient comes with. You can see this whole area of the oral cavity, which should have been a healthy pinkish color, is turned into a whitish blanket. This is all whitish, and with some mucous fibrosis comes trismus. Trismus means that decreased mouth opening. This is happening because the normal mucosa is being replaced by fibrosis, and as you know, in fibrous tissue, they contract over time, and when they contract over time, it leads to decreased mouth opening or trismus. So sometimes it's a normal mouth opening is around 4 centimeters or 4 fingers, and slowly it comes down to maybe 2 centimeters, then 1 centimeter, and sometimes it is total block. You just cannot open the mouth. So the nutrition of these people becomes very alarmingly not maintained, because they lose weight, they are not able to take care of their oral hygiene, and then they end up getting sick. Okay, coming back to submucous fibrosis. The predisposing factors, as I told you, include tobacco, lime and pan, and anemia is also one of the important factors which should not be ignored. That according to me, and you need to take good fibers as well, because the not just the oral hygiene is not maintained by just the oral hygiene, but the GI hygiene also helps in maintaining a good hygiene. A good gut is a good oral cavity. Treatment includes, as I told you, avoidance of causative factors, improvement of oral hygiene, correction of vitamins and minerals, and mouthwashes. Topical steroids may help, especially in the symptoms of the patient, such as the burning, which may be associated with the submucous fibrosis. If it is increasing, or if you see a patient who is having an ulcer associated with submucous fibrosis, I would recommend that you would refer the patient for to a ENT surgeon. The reason being that these ulcers can develop if they start becoming raised, or sometimes even infiltrative. This is a raised lesion which looks like a cancerous lesion. Okay, this is over the angle, just over the angle of mouth. These are a few pictures of the tongue. This is oral cavity cancer. These are all raised lesions. Leukoplakic patch, which is turning into a cancer. Because I say that because it is seeming like a bossy raised lesion rather than being a flat lesion. Another lesion over the hard palate. You can see it over here. A very disturbed, bossy, and raised lesion over the hard palate, which is also continuing over the other side of the buccal mucosa. If you just pay attention to this here, picture here. Okay. There's another the slide which I need to share with you. Okay. This was the oral cavity which we just did. Coming to the oropharynx, the anatomy which I revised with you just on the starting, that it starts from behind the anterior pillars and continue up to the posterior pharyngeal wall. So the most important structure which we see encounter in the oropharynx is basically the tonsils in between the anterior and posterior tonsillar pillars. This is when we open the mouth. This is the normal look which we see in the oral cavity, that the tonsil, we may visualize it. The mucosa over it is healthy pinkish. It is not inflamed, and you can the other mucosa is also not inflamed. But in an abnormal picture, you can see over the other side as well. You can have follicles. These are the small pus points over the which collect in the crypts of the tonsils. As you know that there are crypts in the tonsillar bed, and they when they are filled with pus, that's how they look like. Okay, and the surrounding structure, there's inflammation in the tonsil. Normal looking. That's why I showed you here, because this is a normal look of the healthy looking pinkish mucosa of the tonsils. This is not inflamed at all. And if you see another picture, you can see the follicles over the tonsillar surface. These are also pretty enlarged tonsils. Okay, and but they are inflamed. Another picture you can see, if you divide the tonsillitis into pathological categories, they are basically divided into parenchymal tonsillitis, in which there is just parenchymal edema and swelling of the tonsils. There's no follicles over the tonsils. And the second one is the follicular tonsillitis, which I just showed you. Going back a little, this is the follicular tonsillitis. Okay, and there's another tonsillitis, which is the in which these basically there's a coating of the tonsils with a layer of the pus. Okay, and the bacteriology is different in both these groups. In this, the ones which are having a follicular tonsillitis, there's beta hemolytic streptococci. Haemophilus influenzae, and in the coated ones, you should have a differential diagnosis of diphtheria or candidiasis. So diphtheria is a more ominous one which we need to think about and act accordingly. Acha, before I go to the next topic, that what to do about the next ones. In acute follicular tonsillitis, as you know, the patient would be coming with a lot of pain, problems in swallowing, sometimes phonation, but not much. But the patient would be definitely in pain. So once he comes in, you would take a good history, and the patient would also be having some fever as well. So once the patient comes in, take a good history, and when you open the mouth, you can see these follicles or an inflamed mucosa parenchyma. Then you would be should be thinking about a tonsillitis. And once you think about tonsillitis, then you need to give some treatment as well. The treatment would include good oral hygiene, good lots of fluids, and you would need to good give antibiotic to cover the bacterial coverage over here, and good analgesia. Like analgesia is very important here because the antibiotics take at least 24 to 48 hours to start the action and the swelling to subside. So this analgesia would help in the meantime so that they can start taking their oral diet as much as possible. For diphtheria, um, if you're thinking of diphtheria, you should do an throat swab. Usually, we don't. It is recommended that you should do a throat swab for every kind of oropharyngeal problem. But clinically speaking, we don't. If we see a clinical picture of acute inflammation, we go with a clinical judgment that does that require a throat swab or not. Throat swab we reserve for those patients which are coming to us on a if they have already to have a treatment and they're not responding to the treatment, then we take a throat swab. But if the patient is having a you're thinking of diphtheria, patient is coming from an area which is not immunized or does not have a history of immunization, then you should go for a throat swab. Throat swab in which you will be taking preparing a slide, sending it to the microbiologist, and asking them to take a sample of the throat. And we will be talking a little bit about the retropharyngeal and parapharyngeal abscesses as well. I'll be showing you some pictures. The causes include
नहीं। हेलो डॉक्टर सदाफ, आपको आवाज आ रही है मेरी? मेरी आ रही है वहाँ? नहीं नहीं, मेरी आ रही है, मेरी आवाज आ रही है।
And we incise just over the soft palate area, so that and this is with the help of a scissor. Uh, and once you open up, give an incision with the help of a scissor or a knife, the pus comes out and relieves the pain and the problems that the patient is having. Coming to the retropharyngeal space abscess, it lies behind the pharynx between the buccopharyngeal fascia and prevertebral fascia, and extends from the base of the skull to the bifurcation of trachea T4 T5, and it is divided into two main compartments by the median fibrous septum. This is the median fibrous septum. This is the posterior pharyngeal wall. These are the lymph nodes in the retropharyngeal area. So, if this is a very important point that this there is show a different presentation for acute retropharyngeal abscess and a chronic retropharyngeal abscess. The retropharyngeal abscesses are more common. Acute retropharyngeal abscesses are more common in children, caused by streptococcus pneumonia infections, Haemophilus influenza, or Staph aureus. There can be a suspected impacted foreign body there. Traumatic injuries can also there. So once there's an acute retropharyngeal abscess, you would see bulging over one side of the posterior pharyngeal wall. This is how it would appear once you see from the oral cavity. This is a pharyngeal. This RAF is preventing this abscess from going on the other side. And this is more common in children. The symptoms associated would be dysphagia, cough. Torticollis means indicate the patient would be head would be tilted on one side, and the patient would not be able to move their head on the other side because of the spasm of the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the other muscles as well. Paresthesia, anicate fever, and rolling of saliva because of the intense pain and trismus. Diagnosis based on clinical observation. You would have a raised TLC count. The soft tissue X-ray neck would show an attenuation of the perivertebral space. I don't have an X-ray to show you about that. That would be a good addition to it next time. And the treatment would include hospitalization for IV antibiotics, fluid replacement, and analgesia and antipyretics. You may need to surgically incise and drain it under local anesthesia or local general anesthesia as the situation occurs, and send the specimen or for culture sensitivity. The chronic retropharyngeal abscesses are more common in the adults patients, more common in tuberculous patients, and it's also called caries of cervical spine. It is also sometimes associated with traumatic injuries. Here you can see that the median raphe is eaten away, and the vertebral body is also eaten away, so it gives a very homogeneous bulging over the posterior pharyngeal wall. Sometimes it can be so much bulging that there may be some shortness of breath or stridor also associated with this. Um, More of shortness of breath, not stridor. So basically, the patient will be coming to you with dysphagia, a lot of maybe low grade fever or medium grade fever, because chronic abscesses are associated with and TB, and they have a low grade fever, and anorexia, and, weight loss may be associated with it, and a longer history as compared to an acute retropharyngeal abscess. How do we diagnose CBC and raised ESR? Plain X-ray neck would tell you the lateral view would tell you the about the retropharyngeal abscess here and the location. You can have a further good detailing with the CT scan and or MRI. You can do a needle aspiration or an open biopsy under general anesthesia. Treatment would include anti-tuberculosis treatment, and if it is large and if it is obstructing the airway, you need to do an incision and drainage of the abscess. Okay, I'll just go to the clinical picture. Okay, the another thing which is important, which you should know need to know as a student, is basically Ludwig's angina, also called as a submandibular abscess. And it is basically more than abscess, it is a cellulitis of the floor of the mouth, and 80% is due to dental root abscesses, dental root infections. Especially in the lower premolar or first or second molar tooth, infections can lead to infections in the submandibular space, or sometimes even in the neck. A few days back, we had done an incision drainage of a large abscess which was going right from the skull base to the root of neck, and that was related to the dental root infections. 20% of the times it may be due to tonsillitis and other soft tissue infections. This is how it would look like. It's a very firm swelling, and there will be hyperemia over the floor of the mouth. There will be swelling and edema, The alarming thing about this may be that if it is associated with infection in the floor of the mouth, the tongue may be raised and it may fall back, leading to obstruction of the airway. So that is what we need to look for, that the patient does not have any shortness of breath, especially or um breathing. Another picture of another patient of Ludwig's angina. This is a very indurated swelling or cellulitis, and there's no as such collection of pus here. So, but you would still incise the if there's any raised floor of the mouth, and if you think that the clinical picture is deteriorating, you would be incising the floor so that the tension is released. And definitely, the major part of the treatment is the IV antibiotics and IV analgesia. And you need to monitor the patient for a good airway. The organisms include bacterioid species, Streptococcus viridans, representation as I told you, airway obstruction, trismus, dribbling of saliva, and the floor of the mouth can be raised, and the fever is also present there. Antibiotics which are of treatment of choice would be coamoxiclav or along with a metronidazole. You also may need to do an incision and drainage, or basically just an incision just to give some space for the subcutaneous tissue to expand. And airway protection, if the patient is losing the airway or desaturating, you may need to do an intubation or do a tracheostomy if you're not able to do a endotracheal intubation. Thank you. So here we conclude. If there's any questions from the audience, can you please type it or raise your hand so that the host can allow your mics to be turned on. Any questions, please?